In 1919, he hit 29 home runs and was sold to the New York Yankees.
A three-run home run for Buffington. The Yankees now lead by a score of 3-2. Bill Lee is now going over to a couple of the Yankees, and there they go again.
Hits it to deep left. That might send the Yankees to the World Series.
Varitek and A-Rod going at it. Roberts is going. Posada's throw. Roberts safe.
And what can I say? Just tip my hat and call the Yankees my daddies.
Welcome to Fanbase, a deep dive into the greatest rivalry in sports. Brian Shackman along with John Senical. We are at episode 185. We basically will update a little bit of Red Sox camp. We'll talk about Yankees injuries and their lineup a little bit. And, we'll talk a little Pete Rose maybe, and maybe even some Alex Verdugo. John will humor me on that one.
You will not rest until Alex Verdugo has a home, right, Brian?
Well, listen, I'll wait for later to give my hot take on Verdugo, who remains unsigned at the age of 28, having played with the two most storied franchises in the sport.
Three. Play for the Dodgers too, right?
Oh, that's right. So I don't really understand it, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. First, with Red Sox camp, I mean, it's hard to judge a lot of different things. All I know is that, as we talked about off mic, I mean, Rafi Devers hasn't taken a ground ball in a game at third, and Bregman has. And so I guess my question to you is this a sort of subtle way for it to take care of itself?
Yeah, if you listen to stuff in spring training, you hear this phrase a lot. Things have a way of working themselves out. That's what the managers and coaches like to say. And I feel like, it's doing that in Red Sox camp, because if you look at the way he finished last season, right? He finished the last season on the IL basically because of his shoulders. And I think, the shoulders is basically going to dictate that he is not going to be a fielding player for the Red Sox. He will be a DH if he starts the season as your DH, which right now I would say probably is a long shot, given the fact that he hasn't taken a swing, I guess, in games too, and he hasn't taken any grounders. So I think you're looking at probably Alex Bregman as your starting third baseman, and hopefully Devers as your DH.
So if historically, say for instance you've missed just about everything into the second week in March, if say he could go 100% starting, say this week, maybe even, could he make it for opening day?
I mean, I would think so, as long as he's healthy, and he's going to probably most likely DH, given the fact that he is working on his rehab, I'll call it rehab, injury, or to get himself in game shape. I would say, yes, he can be ready because he would be strictly a DH. It's tough because he hasn't, as far as we know, he hasn't really done anything, and you have to be game ready. And like we said, if you're going to start the season, you need to be 100%, especially in the AL East.
I wonder how he's, it's just I wonder what the internal dynamics are, whether, how not ready he is to play, whether this is something they sort of coordinated or not. It sounds a little conspiratorial, right? But in some ways, if it were conspiratorial, it would make a lot of sense.
It's interesting how the Red Sox, in a way, have never really seemed worried about this whole situation, right? This seemed like it was going to be a big deal going in, how he sat there in the press conference was, I'm a third baseman, blah, blah, blah. But they never really seemed worried about it. So I think all along they probably were going to say, regardless of how you're feeling, we're worried about your physicality, I guess, and staying on the field. So we need you to be a DH, and that's how you're going to stay on the field and win a World Series for the Red Sox. I mean, I think that'd be their pitch to him.
Yeah, or the pitch. I don't know. I just think it's a no-brainer, and now conveniently it's going to happen that way.
But that said, we that also is contingent on the Red Sox having a second baseman, right? And there's a lot of question about that right now. Again, we're early in spring, but Christian Campbell isn't really performing that well.
Right.
Who else? Vaughn Grisham was on the talk. He isn't performing well.
You got Romero is in the mix. I mean, with Campbell, I mean, right? He's young. He's a big prospect. I always go back to the Pedroia rookie thing. It's like, the first month does not dictate anything. Even look at your guy, your shortstop. He struggled a little out of the gate, and I don't know. I think that it's good to get the bad at bats out in the spring. So it's not that I'm not concerned, but him struggling in spring doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to be a good pro at second base for the Red Sox. Maybe it's
No.
you could say maybe it's too early, but sometimes this is a process. Sometimes you come up, you get shellacked, you go down, you tweak it, you come back. And, I really think that adversity is what can define a pro ball player, right? I mean, how they because nobody goes through it scot-free. Nobody doesn't struggle. I mean, everybody you save, even Griffey struggled. The only
Everybody
one who
struggled.
never really struggled maybe is Tony Gwynn.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I don't push the panic button now because, like you said, it is early in spring training. But at the same time, there hasn't been much talk about what a plan B would be as far as how to handle it. Because other than the talk about Bregman being the second baseman when they first signed him, which we know most likely is not going to happen, there hasn't been much talk about is there a plan B at second base for the Red Sox if there's no Vaughn Grissom, if there's no Christian Campbell. I mean, Ceddanne Rafaela is a great player, and he's having a great spring. And I think he would be versatile enough. If he could play shortstop, he could play second base, or Trevor Story, vice versa, flip him around. So, yes, there are internal options for the Red Sox, but something to keep an eye on for sure, Brian. Something to keep an eye on.
I mean, Story's, I think, his arm strength was always an issue. So, I mean, a lot of people thought he'd end up at second base anyway. But he's John Senecal. I'm Brian Shackman. This is Fan Base, a deep dive into the greatest rivalry in sports. Listen, I mean, the Stanton stuff was almost comical, right? But Luis Gil, now they said a couple of months. That's not nothing. I mean, he misses all April and May and June. Jeez.
Yeah, they're talking probably minimum like 3 months, because you figure if you're shut down now, right now is you're shut down for minimum 6 weeks, right? Which means at that 6 weeks, you got to get all the way through your spring training ramp up. Not like, oh, I was in the middle of the season, I was in shape, and I went and sat down. So you're probably another month after that. So you're probably looking, I would say 10 weeks. Yeah, 10 weeks before you would see him again, given all the fact that he's healthy, which again goes to show you this whole Stroman stuff right out the gates where, they were worried about him and, disgruntled and all that. He's going to be fine. He's going to be needed. That's why the Dodgers have 12 starting pitchers. It's just how it works.
Now, I have always been a Stroman fan. Do you think he's too washed up to be effective? Do you think he could be good as the fifth starter?
Yeah, absolutely. He could. As long as he stays healthy. He's had a great track record of staying healthy. He's always been the guy who's the little guy who always performs above the ceiling. He's a competitor. He'll be fine. Again, earlier in the season, there's days off, so maybe you can skip him on a turn. But I would think as long as he's healthy, he's in there. And the Yankees, they should be putting up the runs to support it. Are they going to put up 6 runs a game? I don't know. That's a lot to ask, but they should be putting up enough to support Marcus Stroman's 4 ERA.
How's Jason Dominguez been?
Yeah, hot and cold. He hasn't been great. Couple hits, he's batting in the 100s. But again, early in the season, and he has had some transgressions in left field. I think I've talked all along. I'm nervous about it because he hasn't had a great sample size in Major League Baseball. So I'm always worried about that. A guy only has 26 games played at the Major League level. So the jury's still out of him. He's again, I would say. A big deal with him as long as he stays healthy. Let's make sure he stays healthy because he's a young guy. He's already dealt with a lot of injuries, big injuries, in his early career. So he's healthy, which is all I'm putting stock in right now. And he's penciled in to be the left fielder for the Yankees going forward, it looks like. So
how about Volpe? Has his spring been good?
Volpe looks okay. His average is not high, but he's been making pretty loud contact. I think Volpe will be fine.
That's sort of his thing, right? That's sort of who he is, kind of.
Yeah, well, if you look at Volpe, he batted like 209 his first year. He was up to 240, I think, or 243 last year. So you hope that he's a 260, 265 hitter. You think eventually, Anthony Volpe projects around 280 hitter, hopefully 25 home runs, 20 to 25 home runs. So every year you hope that he'll get better. And I would anticipate that he will get better.
Did any of the injury stuff make you feel like the season you're not as optimistic, or is it all just sort of standard blips in spring?
Well, the Stanton stuff with his 2 tennis elbows, that's just that to me is a little strange because, again, I think it's a lot of weightlifting. That's just way too much weight work. But this early in the year for him to have arm issues, usually it's like a hamstring or something with his legs. So again, Cashman said he's going to miss 60 games. It's just how it works. DJ's hurt. He's got something wrong with his calf. I mean, I don't know, dude. I think you just got to cut bait with him. Is there just...
Will you just release him? Trade him?
Who's going to take him? I mean, he's making $15 million a year. You could definitely release him. I mean, I look at guys, if you release them, are they going to come back and hurt you? DJ LeMahieu, I don't see him coming back and hurting you. Stanton, if you release him, the Dodgers will pick him up and he'll bat 600 in the playoffs. It's just how it works. He's from California. He'll find his way home. It's just a guy like him, you get worried about releasing, but a DJ LeMahieu, I do not think is going to hurt you, given the fact that you can replace him very easily. Mike Stan, I keep calling him that. Giancarlo is a much harder person to replace, even the fact that he's on the IL all the time. He hits the home runs, dude. I mean, that's
when he's
a
healthy,
big difference. It's a
he
big
changes
difference.
the whole lineup, in my opinion, to be honest. I still think that in some ways he's so key, and that's why his injury, and I don't give a crap. I hope he stays out the whole year, but I think they're a much different team when he's healthy and he's playing. John Senecal, Brian Shackman, episode 185, ripping through some stuff here. We both have some pretty intense work schedules right now. Is all the Pete Rose stuff come from what Trump said? Is that what it all stems from? Is like Manfred's revisiting it because Trump said it?
Well, it's funny when you bring up the Pete Rose thing. So everyone's like, "Oh, they're going to pardon Pete Rose. Trump's going to pardon Pete Rose, and he's going to get into the Hall of Fame." Well, that has nothing to do with the Hall of Fame. Like, he'd be pardoned for a crime. Betting on baseball was not a crime, right? It was like a moral clause, basically, is why he's not in the Hall of Fame, and he's suspended from baseball. We're talking about tax evasion and that kind of stuff when he went to Pete Rose prison in the early 90s. So, but again, I think the perception would be if a president pardons you, it puts you on a different level, I guess, and that would open the door for Manfred. I would not say Manfred. I guess Manfred would have to reinstate him into Major League Baseball, and then the Hall would take a look at it. Because again,
the thought was obviously that I think that the elite insiders in baseball never wanted to give him the satisfaction on earth of getting in. And the thought was upon his death, they would come around to it at some point. I mean, that's always been the assumption the people I talk to have.
Yeah, I think it's just probably they wanted to stick it to him, right? He doesn't get to see it as he's alive. I don't like it. I don't like it. The whole.
You don't like what?
I don't like the fact that people get credit for something after they're dead. I don't like it. I mean, you can say what you want about it.
I mean, there's an old argument, but you were one of those in favor of letting him in while he was alive.
Yeah, I mean, if everything is true about what he said, what happened with him, and he didn't affect the outcome of games or whatever, but he shot himself in the foot. We've talked about this before. He was always lied all along, so it didn't help. But I don't like the fact that you got to die to get something. It's just that's the way I look at it. Like if he would still be alive, we wouldn't be talking about this.
Correct. That is 100% true. I don't know. I'm so conflicted. It's like I'm less conflicted. I'm more conflicted on this than I am maybe of the steroid guys. For some reason, I don't know. I mean, I find myself still not wanting Clemens and Bonds in, even though I get the argument. How can you not have these guys in when they were the best? But with the betting, I don't know. My problem is that it's like Lance Armstrong. It's about all this stuff about when you cheat or you do something that's against the rules and then you lie about it and then you lie about it for years. Like, to me, that's my problem. And again, it's so petty. It has no bearing on my life. I really couldn't give a crap or whether he was in the Hall of Fame or not. It doesn't make a difference, but I just get hung up on the lying part of it, right? That's where if he had just 25 years ago had said, yeah, I screwed up. I love competing. I never would bet against my team, but I did it. And I just feel like the lack of humility always turns me off.
Yeah, and these guys are they get the recognition, right, that they deserve in the public, but they don't get it in the Hall of Fame. Like you look at the Yankee game, spring training game, Clemens was in the dugout at the Yankee State at Steinbrenner Field, and he was talking to the pitchers, and he's with the team, and he's around the team, and he's around the Astros, and they still celebrate him. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean nothing until an athlete, unless you're in the Hall of Fame. It really doesn't. That's a defining moment for you as an athlete. Maybe not as a person, but as an athlete. And if that's what you are, that's your being, and you can say what you want. I don't give a rat's ass about the Hall of Fame, which Clemens said, but deep down inside, he does.
Yeah. And that when he gets in, he'll cry and cry and cry. And especially the longer they're away from the game, the more that stuff means, because it just always does. I mean, I've covered enough athletes in general. It's amazing to me how many athletes were absolute assholes when they were players, but then when they're not, how much nicer they are in the media because they realize that they need the media so badly to stay in people's eyes and minds. It's gross.
I mean, in a way, I hope they do eventually get into the Hall of Fame, because me as a baseball fan, I was front and center for the steroid era. That was the heyday of baseball. We were, and I mean, I say what you want, man, but that was great theater, man. It was awesome theater. And we haven't seen anything like that in a long time in Major League Baseball. I mean, baseball is fun now. There's a lot of exciting players, but dude, watching those home run chases every night was insane.
Well, I remember the ticket, because there was interleague play, was still pretty new, and nobody could get a ticket when because McGuire could have hit. I feel like he could have hit 70 in Boston. He didn't. So my wife and I went. We got crappy seats, and because our friend worked for the team, and he didn't hit it, and we were like, oh, bummer. But like we spent all that money to just on the off chance that he would hit it. Or hit a home run, So I totally get it. Last item up for bid. I didn't know. Agassi and Steffi Graf's kid. Obviously, he can have German citizenship. But what's it for? Is it for the Olympics? Is it for the Baseball Classic? What's it for?
Yeah, this is the WBC, World Baseball Classic qualifiers. Have been going on for like the last month around the country. And this one, the most recent one, they've had a bunch in spring training time. This one's in Arizona, so he's playing for Team Germany. He's a pitcher.
And he pitched for USC, I think, right?
Yeah, USC, and he had a little interesting career at USC because he got in and he went in as a freshman and he was hurt in 2019. He had Tommy John surgery on his arm, so he missed the whole season, right? And then COVID hits, so then he misses that. So he has a very, very brief college career, and he does okay. He has like what is he? He has like a 2.96 ERA over the whole season with 28 Ks and 27 innings pitched. He's a relief pitcher, so. But he plays for UFC D1 baseball, and he's got the dual citizenship because his mother's from Germany. And interesting that the coach on the team, manager Jendrik Spia, found him through social media. His posts on social media about him still playing and pitching, and he played in the MLB Draft League last year in 2024, so it kept him on the map. And so now he's playing for the Team Germany in WBC.
But is he trying to make it in the bigs? Is he trying to be a competitive pitcher?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the plan. So he's taking the time now to do this, and coming off of the MLB Draft League, they call it, I guess, in 2024, he's hoping to hook on with a team. So we'll see. I mean, you never know with injuries.
It's good.
Always use pitching.
Good thing he didn't play tennis. That would be tough.
They said I was reading an article on him, and he said his parents never forced him to play tennis, but there was a big problem that he would go to the tennis courts, and he always thought he had hit the ball as hard as he could. And for him, hitting the ball as hard as he could was hitting it out of the court and over there. And they said it didn't take his parents long to realize that tennis wasn't his thing, and they signed him up for baseball.
It's funny because I have a little bit of a history with Agassi. We'll close on this. His autobiography is one of the best sports books I've ever read. It's unbelievable. And I really embarrassed myself when I was at CNBC. On a last minute thing, I had to go interview him. He was doing a benefit with John McEnroe in New York City. And I researched the headlines but didn't read the book. And all the headlines were about his admission of drug use when he was on tour. And it was a benefit tournament. And that's all I asked him about, right? And he was gracious and he was poised. And then a couple months later, I was like, you know what? I want to read the book. And I read the book. And the book is like, it's just a little blip in the book. And it's not even that important. And the book was so freaking good that I wrote him a letter of apologizing for me not being prepared for my interview. Now, there's no way I could have read the book in time because I was given the assignment like the night before. But I still did a shitty job. And it was one of my biggest regrets in journalism was that interview because I was really disrespectful in my opinion. And if anyone has not read the book, read his book. It is so good.
His son's name is Jaden. So if you're watching baseball and you're watching the WBC in Germany, if they do qualify, maybe you'll see him pitch. Speaking of journalists, Brian, I think we should mention this. For people that listen in Connecticut to us, longtime journalist in Connecticut, just passed away. His name's Tom Monahan.
Of
He was
course.
he was a political reporter for NBC Connecticut for many years, and before he worked in radio. And I worked with Tom for numerous years. I sat in the car with him, worked at the Capitol with him, went on trips with him. We covered Governor Rowland extensively. Tom was an awesome dude, man, and he owned Connecticut politics. He was one of the, and I say the funniest guys you will ever meet. He could make you laugh at any situation. He was just a good dude. His wife, Nan, is still
With
survives.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. My condolences go out to her and the rest of the family. And rest in peace, Tom Monahan, a
Yeah.
great dude, a pillar in politics, a pillar in journalism.
I talked about him Tuesday morning on my local radio show because he was one of the last old school journalists that would do his story, then go out for drinks with people he covered, and learned a lot from the bar stools as well as the news conference space. You know what I mean? Like that was how he operated.
Yeah, and he wasn't a drinker in a long time in the last years of, as long as I knew him either. I mean, I went on many trips with him. I mean, we
Well,
covered John Roll.
It's not even the drinking though. It's just the way.
It's just the way exactly. But man,
what he did,
that dude could command a room. I remember we covered George W. Bush when he was campaigning, and he got off the podium and walked straight past every single reporter in that place and walked right to Tom Monahan, shook his hand and talked to him. And not only that, but George W. Bush walked around afterwards and introduced himself to every single person in that room, including the photographers, which impressed the hell out of me for being in that situation. But man, he could contend. I'm gonna miss him, man. I haven't seen him in a number of years, but what an awesome dude.
Yeah, he's a legend, and in a true sense, not even overstating it. Thanks for bringing that up, John. Again, you've been listening to Fan Base, a deep dive into the greatest rivalry in sports.